pedazos, pinceladas, para poder introducir al doctor Robert Stake, que hoy participa con la conferencia de evaluación de educación, mérito, meritocracia, la equidad y la experiencia. Me encantaría que me acompañara a darle una bienvenida, un aplauso al doctor Stake para que...
Hello, hola. Have a sit down. Yeah, it's very good to be here. I'm very pleased to have the invitation. Here we are, a room full of educators. We're teachers, all of us teachers. We believe in the experience of education. We seek truth in assessment. We seek truth in assessment. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll sit down. We don't entirely agree on what education is. We have multiple ideas on how to teach. We have competing ideas on what to teach. So, we have some differences. We sometimes get upset when government or a department head or a student or a scientist tries to tell us what good education is. Sometimes when we say education, we refer to our field, our profession, the work that we do. This is education, and we are the caretakers of education. I'm supposed to change something here. I don't know. Anybody have a clicker?
That's right. Para mover la presentación.
I lost you. Here it is. Okay. There we go. So, we are the caretakers of education. We nourish her, we cradle her. Sometimes, when we say education, we refer to what a person has attained from schooling and life experiences. His education, her education, a property, a possession. Sooner or later, the individual person is the caretaker of that property. Education is both a vocation and a possession. We recognize the value of the work of educators, and we recognize the accomplishment and capacity for thinking and doing of individual people, and we recognize the accomplishment and capacity for thinking and doing of a population of people, such as the people in this room, or the people in this university, or the people of Yucatan. We should recognize when, collectively, we have been equitable. We should recognize when, collectively, we have restrained our intimidation. Up close and personal, we can pretty much tell when we have done a good job of educating. We can pretty much tell that a group of people is well educated. However we define it, all of us evaluate education. We are all assessors. It is human nature to see goodness and badness. Long before language, we tasted meat from the fire and now with multiple languages in many classrooms. We hold some teachings dear and are irritated by others. Some of our assessments are impulsive and emotional, and others capture the essence of merit. And always, fairness and intimidation are issues. Merit in education is a human judgment. Good assessment depends on good data, but the assessments always are interpretations. To evaluate education, it is quite inadequate to measure just the achievement of students. Even if we had good tests, they are simplistic, misrepresenting the whole of education. They are destructive to the curriculum and injurious to personal aspirations. Student testing is a part of assessing education, but as stated recently by your chief of the National Institute of Educational Evaluation, Sylvia Schmelkes. Is that right? Schmelkes? Sylvia Schmelkes said something like, "A single measure cannot speak for the whole of education." In Figure 1, from a paper by Isabel Arbizu and Gloria Contreras and myself, we illustrate the complexity of assessing the merits of university teaching. There we are. The complexity is shown here of assessing university teaching. Many things to be assessed, and many ways of doing it. Look at the many sources and tools over on your left. Up here, northwest, northeast, are the criteria and critical incidents. Oh, wait, try this and see if it works. Yeah. Criteria, not just criteria, but criteria and critical incidents, which are a part of informal evaluation and sometimes left out of formal evaluation. All of these leading to formative and summative evaluation for the improvement of teaching and administrative review. Okay, these facets of this graphic are situational and not highly correlated with each other. We've lost Martha. So we cannot get a full picture of merit in education just by measuring a few of them. Good measurements need careful thought. And some evaluation of education is analytic, based on criteria and standards. Sometimes those criteria are explicit and well articulated. Sometimes the criteria of good education are implicit, sometimes deep in the unconscious. Many of the criteria of good teaching have been well explicated in our literature, and many are felt deeply in our hearts. Many of our standards for being educated are covert, poorly articulated. Many of the standards for the education of a people are beautifully articulated, but serve the people poorly. Measurement specialists my fellow experts are inclined to say that explicit criteria are better than implicit. Written standards are more fair than unwritten, they say. I disagree. They're both necessary. Emphasizing written standards, as our governments do, is artificial and self-serving and may violate the Constitution of Mexico. We who are sophisticated in the language of assessment will use criteria and standards to discriminate, to shape educational practice, and to add to our own authority and power. We language experts do this, sometimes, often unconsciously, not realizing that our own definitions of goodness are biased toward our own values. In practice, assessing education is undertaken by teachers, students, researchers, and officials, and often, by so doing, they violate the standing and opportunity of less privileged people who have different stakes in the conduct of education. The philosopher Voltaire said, "The best is the enemy of the good." In striving for the best education possible, we downplay the best interests of some people who generally agree that one and the same standards of goodness of education is for all people fair. But people are better educated when each person's uniqueness is part of the design. The best assessment we can achieve is not through rationality and standardization, but through deep thought about merit, taking into account the well-being of individual students and the wisdom of teachers and researchers and officials. Education broadly is more than the services of the school and more than the intellectual achievement of people. Education is the heartbeat of life. Quality of life is intimately related to the quality of education. John Dewey, that's John. John Dewey said, "Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself." At the beginning of a day, the teacher looks for the entree to the first lesson and immediately faces the uniqueness of each child, each student. Each student comes already educated, each one differently. One thing he or she is learning is that uniformity is respected, getting it right. But what the teacher knows is that each learning is an experience, and each experience is unique. Is the commonality or the uniqueness more important? Assessing good education is not so much learning how far learners have approached a perfect score, but of learning how experience is interpreted in meaningful ways. We can choose to emphasize profiles so that discrepancies of learners can be visualized. Or we can choose to emphasize portfolios so that the workings of life are uniquely portrayed. Now, is that good Spanish? This was supposed to be finished. Here we go, norm reference assessment. For many instructors, comparison of one student with another is necessary in grading. For some teachers, ranking students is the essence of teaching. For knowing the quality of students' work, comparison is a distraction. It's unavoidable, but not at the center of understanding a student. What is central is merit and integrity of performance. As seen for this one student, seen directly, experienced, and not mainly as comparison with others. Norm groups, reference groups, are distraction for evaluation. What others do is not essential for assessment. Norms are an administrative convenience. Norm groups make fiction seem factual. Today there's a hurricane in the Pacific. If Baja California washes into the ocean, the norm reference scores of the students in Sonora and Chihuahua will go up, or at least be different, because the reference group has changed. Have Sonora and Chihuahua changed? How well a student does in school is indeed influenced by social interaction with others. But experience, perception of merit should not change just because other people do something different. Speaking of fictions, the United States Marine Corps has an advertising slogan: be the best that you can be. But there is no best. Anyone can be. Anyone can be better. Similarly, much education rhetoric challenges students to rise to their potential. Potential is a fiction. Assessment of education should not imply that there is an asymptotic lid on human performance. We have a penchant for measuring things. Isn't it surprising that we have so little idea? Missed that one. We have a penchant for measuring things. Isn't it surprising that we have so little idea of how much of various areas a student has learned? Maybe better than a profile of competition with the norm group, a student can be known by his or her territorial curiosity. With what topics has this student become engaged? Excuse my self-interest. There it is. Excuse my self-interest as I show you this figure, a content map of my own topical knowledge. At the top are scholarly interests, the arts, language arts, and the area represents the amount of knowledge. In the middle, my professional interests, a lot about evaluation. And at the bottom, personal knowledge, informal knowledge, the knowledge about family goes down and down and down. You can make up some conclusion of that paragraph. Moving on to meritocracy. We need to consider the use put to assessments of merit. Mexico and its neighbors to the north sometimes think of themselves as meritocracy. Sometimes? Mr. Dodd? Sometimes. It's a common belief that a meritocracy supports teaching toward equity and justice. It's assumed that universal testing and working toward uniform learning standards helps level the playing field, giving all students equal opportunity to move up the socioeconomic ladder. It's not so. It's not so. A meritocracy fosters competition in ways that assure that those having had the most privilege of education in the past will get a disproportionate greater share of social benefit. Meritocracy wasn't invented for education. It was invented to run governments more efficiently, not to share privileges with the poor. The Chinese of 10 centuries ago followed the advice of Confucius and replaced government leadership through dynastic inheritance with government by civil servants having passed examinations. More than a century ago, rather abruptly, the British sought military and commercial superiority by installing psychometrically competent people to run government and industrial departments, replacing the sons of landed and titled fathers. The Americans soon created a civil service commission to end the spoils system, we call it, allocating jobs to supporters. We raised merit above inheritance and cronyism in our meritocracy, so to speak. Does Mexico have a civil service commission agency department covering all? You take tests. Oh. Well, this is Michael Young, or Michael Young's brain. The history of meritocracy in Great Britain has been told by Michael Young. He saw education as a key factor. As it was earlier, prestigious schools sent their graduates to the highest work responsibilities, such as national government, while trade schools sent skilled workers to menial work settings. With meritocracy, test performance and on-the-job merit became the basis for civil service selection, and later in other work settings, with women and minorities ever so gradually fitting in. Many protectors of the home, church, and society resisted the changes toward meritocracy. Strong were their traditions for who would do what work. The schools were resistant too, having their own expectations, predominantly rewarding the compliant student, I think, as to who should benefit from further education and appointment. Many scholars joined the ranks. Here's the rest of a man. This is George Bernard Shaw, without his brain. He said, the haphazard mobocracy, the haphazard mobocracy must be replaced by democratic aristocracy. That is, by the dictatorship, not of the whole proletariat, but of that 5% capable of conceiving a job and pioneering it in the drive toward its divine goal. With meritocracy, more young women, more young men would have the privilege of being tested, and some would climb the social ladder a step or two, and a smaller few would rise to the top. But making a more precise definition of competence is certainly not a recipe for equity. It's a redefinition of elitism. This meritocratic reform lacked the ring of the Mexican Constitution of 1917, which, as you probably know, forbids all discrimination, including for different capacities. Meritocracy sanctifies discrimination. Meritocracy recognizes that an elite is to be created. At best, a sharing of privilege according to the contribution made to establishing and protecting the well-being of all citizens. At worst, drawing privilege grossly away from those with poorest test scores. In these two large Western meritocracies, Mexico and the USA, and in other developed nations, both best and worst have happened. Civil servants are intellectually able. The intellectually able have a better safety net. The intellectually able have a rationale for discriminating against the less able. 2 years ago, in New York City, Occupy Wall Street successfully drew attention to the benefits gap between the top 1% and the rest of the American society. It continues to be reasoned by the British meritocratic party that putting social responsibility in the hands of the most able facilitates social mobility, that most people then will live a better life than their parents. It can be indeed argued that with the meritocratic advances now in place, that materialistic goods are cheaper and more available. So what do we have? We have welfare for the financial system, increasingly dominating government policy, bailouts for the rich, austerity for the poor. There are too few jobs, and increasingly few for full-time workers. Continuing. Today there are streaks of meritocracy in government and industry, and more in education. But the management of social affairs today around the world is little tied to assessment of merit. Political and economic power dominate. But meritocracy remains part of the aspiration in the schoolhouse. Part of the problem of meritocracy is the inadequate definition of merit. Intelligence is not the solution. Competence is a weak indicator of future performance and caring. Effort is important, but situational, as is past performance on the job. Were they all put together, monitored, and regularly upgraded, meritocracy might be a good goal if kept in balance with equity. Hang in there, we'll have to. Teachers are experienced in the recognition of merit. Their practice is devoted to the increase of merit. They admire and advocate systems of merit in their classrooms and in their communities. They are aware that academic merit is not equivalent to organizational and social merit. They look for a more comprehensive definition of meritocracy than in Michael Young's book. Educators today, as in schools and societies of the past, are protective of the educational system as it is. They preach merit and have situational definitions of it. And when the president redefines the merit of teaching, they go into the street. We cannot eliminate the worship of merit, but we could reduce some of its oversimplification. We cannot make equity a top virtue, but we could reduce some of the discrimination. Ameliorating the gaps in privilege needs some sense of justice. Our constitutions, yours and mine, and the Bible, and Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation are not adequate for the cause we need for equity. Still, a teacher cannot give all A's, or all C's, or all F's. The work of the school will continue to be, has to be, discriminating more than emancipatory. Meritocracy exists in the schools as a default setting, often obscure, regularly heeded. The ethic is pervasive but seldom talked about. Teachers of all ages, styles, and personalities practice it. Only a few of them consider equity an alternative point of view worth explaining or protecting. Teachers express a commitment to fairness, but seldom to equity. There are too many good reasons to discriminate. Meritocracy captures many of those reasons. But meritocracy, however it's formed, is a constraint on equitable teaching in the schools. It's the right one. Big surprise. Quality exists, but as a state of mind, a fantasia. The quality of education in all Mexico and each country is not a physical or measurable commodity. It's a creature of perception and belief. That belief may be based on lots of good evidence, but still, it's a mental construction of the perceivers. President Peña Nieto has a view of the national condition. So does Mario Vasquez Rania, CEO of La Prensa. So does that person sitting next to you. The quality of Mexican education exists, but only in the minds of people. It can't be measured other than through experience. The assessment still is an important commodity for us. Economists invent indicators for all sorts of phenomena, including quality of education. Politicians and researchers do too. Even the best indicators of equity, even the best indicators of quality of education are weak. Graduation rate from secondary school is an important statistic, but a weak indicator of the quality of the work of the educators. Quality has too many other factors, most of which we cannot measure well. National standing on PISA and other international tests is intriguing, but more an indicator of scholastic aptitude than achievement. International tests are poor indicators of the quality of education available to Mexicans, and so, of course, in other countries. What are you saying? Is education more like science and happiness, or more like the stock market and football? Education does not have a bottom line, much as many outsiders would like to install. There are many ingredients of quality that make up education, as displayed back in Figure 1, those boxes. For example, ingredients: teaching, counseling, school management, preschool experience, school spirit, job market, political support, commitment to meritocracy, and many, many more. But some ingredients are more important than others. Does education foster equity? Does the education resist indoctrination? Here are words from writer Doris Lessing. Still no brain, but Doris has a great brain. Doris says, ideally, what should be said to every child repeatedly throughout his or her school life is something like this: you are in the process of being indoctrinated. We have not yet evolved a system of education that is not a system of indoctrination. We're sorry. That's the best we can do. What you're being taught here is an amalgam of current prejudice and the choices of a particular culture. National quality of education is not measured well enough to be a basis for public policy. Our desire to have better education is a proper basis for public policy. With our desires, with our experience, we have our ideas about merit and weakness of our educational system. These ideas are important, and together we can estimate quality, and we can call it assessment. But the practice of education goes wrong when we treat our estimates as real, as we are already doing. Already we teach to the test, treating the estimate as the goal. We work to enhance the indicator marks more than to improve our teaching. The same reasoning pertains to measuring the quality of an individual's teacher or student. True quality cannot be measured. Real competence cannot be measured. We can construct indicators and graphics and estimates, but we should not let them substitute for the best direct observations educators can make of what the students and other educators are doing. Figure 1 here cannot become a true model for the evaluation of teaching because it leaves too much experience out of the picture. Figure 2 is not an accurate picture of my knowledge. Models and indicators and assessments are fictions. They can be well constructed, but they're guesses. Just as we learn much about the human condition from fiction, we can enrich our thought processes by indicators, stretch our minds, but we should not mistake substituting fiction for the real thing. In the end, we should laugh those indicators off. Real assessment should be based on what we ourselves experience and others we trust as educational quality. Here we are, a room full of educators, thoughtful people. We have deep feelings about the quality in education, much drawn from experience. We should hear the counter evidence, the challenges to our feelings, but we should remain skeptical of the assessments of economists and test experts and other fiction writers. Assessment truth lies in personal experience.